very special welcome to you, Dr. Keith Nurse. We're happy that you can join us, and we do look forward to your motivating speech. A very special welcome goes out to, for the first time, joining our lecture series, the acting head of the Open Campus, Dr. Maureen Lucas. Miss Doctor? There she is. I'm glad that you could be with us this afternoon, and we certainly looking forward to continued close relationship with yourself and the Open Campus. The lecture series is in fact the brainchild of the late Dr. Bradley Niles, of whom we are eternally grateful for his vision in trying to tap some of the brilliance of the University of the West Indies and sharing that brilliance, that research with the general public of Barbados. And today certainly is one of those occasions when Dr. Keith Nurse is going to deliver his presentation tapping into the Diasporic Economy. As I said before, we are continuously challenged with our communications, getting the word around. We'd have done some radio advertising. We also publish ad in the Sunday Sun. Those of you who might have seen it, could you just indicate? Yes, you would have seen it. Good, wonderful. So at least that ad is working. We have to continue working with the other things. Without further ado, I wish to invite Dr. Maureen Lucas to introduce our special guest speaker this afternoon. Dr. Lucas has 43 years in the field of education and was a former principal of the Erdeston Teachers Training College, employed with the University of the West Indies from 2000 until 2011. She has worked extensively in the Eastern Caribbean in the area of teachers education. She holds a MA honors degree in geography, political science, and a doctorate in educational leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Maureen Lucas.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to add my own warm welcome to those of Mr. Best, and particularly so to our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Keith Nurse. Dr. Keith Nurse, our speaker for this afternoon, is the director of the Sridath Rampal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services. And this is one of the training, research, and outreach centers of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies. Prior to assuming his present post, Dr. Nurse taught in the Institute of Business and in the Department of Government of the Cave Hill campus. But Dr. Nurse's contribution to the University of the West Indies in particular, and to higher education in general, spreads beyond the boundaries of the Cave Hill campus. In that regard, he has worked with the St. Augustine campus, where he was a member of staff of the Institute of International Relations, as well as academic coordinator of the postgraduate diploma program in arts and cultural enterprise management. From a non-Caribbean perspective, he has served with the Institute for International Development and Cooperation at the University of Ottawa, Canada. Dr. Nurse's scholastic interests are eclectic. In that context, he has authored 2 books, Festival Tourism in the Caribbean and the Caribbean Music Industry. And he has co-authored another, Examining the Windward Islands Banana Industry. That latter work is entitled Windward Islands Bananas, Challenges and Options under the Single European Market. One of his works is currently under review pending publication. That is an edited collection entitled Remittances and Beyond, Migration, Diaspora, and the Global Caribbean Economy, while a monograph, Unthinking Globalization, is in progress. Our speaker holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from the University of Western Ontario, Canada, and a PhD in international relations from the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Keith Nurse to the podium to speak on the topic, Tapping into the Diasporic Economy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lucas, for the introduction. I am gratified to be here. Thanks again, Carlisle, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to come to the Central Bank and make a contribution. In fact, I gave a lecture some years ago on the global economic crisis, if I remember. It was not so long after I arrived in Barbados, and I'm happy to report that I have just edited a book entitled The Global Economic Crisis, Prospects for Developing Countries. So that's actually available. It was released about 2 months ago. Back then, when I presented on the global economic crisis, I argued that it wasn't just a recession, it was actually a depression. There were those who thought I was claiming gloom and doom. I suspect they would not accept that I was wrong at that stage, because the global economy is still in the throes of a process of transformation, which can be defined more broadly as an economic depressionary phase. That leads into what I'm going to talk about, in fact. I'm here to talk about the diasporic economy. And the rationale for talking about this element is not just about how the Caribbean economy has been able to tap into this process, but it's also how the global economy has been transformed and how it will continue to be transformed. In that when the global economy goes through the kinds of transitions that we are seeing currently, it's not just a downturn in the economy, it's actually a reconfiguration of the global economy. And so the things that were established and key features of the global economy are going to be altered. And the new global economy is going to not be an exact replica of the prior global economy before the recession/depression. And in that regard, one of the key features of the new global economy is the extent to which the diasporic economy has become a key driver. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about, referring to the Caribbean context specifically, because the Caribbean is one of the regions in the world with the highest levels of diasporic engagement. Much of the findings that I'll be sharing with you comes from a research project that we managed at the Trinidad Ramble Center. It was funded by the International Development Research Center in Canada. And they funded a research project entitled Strategic Opportunities in Caribbean Migration. This title, in fact, was an interesting one because they wanted to know why we didn't include or focus on challenges. And the argument we made then was that the bulk of the literature had focused on the challenges associated with migration and not the opportunities. And in that regard, we wanted to focus on the strategic opportunities, particularly in relation to how it was transforming the economy of the Caribbean, and particularly the trade opportunities associated with this new element of the global economy. I say new element in the sense that these processes have been going on for a long time. It's just that our awareness of them are fairly new. We focused on two key areas. One was diasporic tourism, and in that regard, we focused on 4 Caribbean countries: Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Guyana, and Suriname, and their associated global cities where the bulk of their diaspora live, or from where most of their diasporic communities travel. And so we focused on these global cities. For many of them, there were clear cases of which ones to choose. So for example, for the Dominican Republic, New York, or Nueva York as I call it, was an obvious example. The bulk of the Dominican diaspora is to be found in New York, and in one section of New York City, in fact, Washington Heights is where a lot of them live. For Jamaica, it could have been many other global cities other than London, but we decided to go with London because it's an established center for the Jamaican diaspora. But it could have been New York, it could have been Toronto, it could have been Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and so on. For Guyana, we chose Toronto. Again, it could have also been New York, but there's a heavy concentration of Guyanese in Toronto. And last but not least, the Surinamese diaspora is largely located in the Netherlands, and particularly the principal cities of Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague. And so that was the first element of the study. The second element focused on what we call brain circulation. Why? Because the Caribbean has the highest rates of brain drain in the world, which is not something necessarily to be proud about, but we wanted to focus on the brain circulation components of that, which is the ways in which we are able to tap into, and organizations in the region have been able to tap into the resources of the diaspora abroad. So we looked at 4 key sectors: health, with a focus on nurses, science and technology with a focus on biotech, telecommunications, and financial services. And so we looked at those 4 areas. What I will be sharing with you is a combination of all of these areas of research, where we look at diasporic entrepreneurship and investment. Just a few months ago, in late 2011, there was an article in the Economist magazine, which I had seen and didn't pay too much attention to it, because I had already been doing research on the diasporic economy and so on for several years. So this wasn't new news for me. But many of my colleagues and many of the people I know in the trade arena and in the diplomatic corps were interested by the article. And it provoked a lot of emails, many of which were directed at me to ask my comment on the article. What this signals is that, and as the article indicates, there's now an increasing recognition that one of the few bright sparks in the global economy is the rate at which the diasporic economy is growing. And so in spite of the fact that we have a global economic recession, many of the key flows associated with the diasporic economy are growing at a rapid rate, faster than the global economy. This is not only restricted to the diasporic economy. Other key features of the new element of the global economy are moving at a faster rate than the old parts of the global economy. So for example, the green economy and let's say renewable technologies are growing in some instances 8-fold in the last 5 years, which says that there's an increasing demand for things associated with renewable technologies, renewable energy, and so forth. So that's an example of new aspects of the global economy. And the creative economy is also growing at a quite rapid rate. They're all growing at somewhere between 5 and 8% per annum. So the diasporic economy, if we use remittances as an indicator, and the creative economy, green economy, the digital economy, etc., they are all growing in excess of 5% per annum, in spite of the global economic recession. So in the last few months, in fact, I have been articulating the term transversal economics because all of the sectors that I've just referred to are transversal, which is that they don't fall into the traditional notions of how we categorize an economy. They have many intersecting elements and multiple income streams and a whole range of stakeholders that would belie traditional economic analysis. And in that sense, it's calling upon us to rethink how we view not just the global economy, but how we view how we manage national economies and regional economies. So for example, in this diagram, which I only thought of at 2 o'clock this morning, what I try to illustrate is that the bulk of the literature on the diasporic economy has focused on remittances and the remittance economy, and understandably so. It's been one of the success stories in the last 2 decades, one can argue, in terms of development. Why? Because if you look at the performance of foreign direct investment or the performance of aid flows to developing countries, or even the multilateral trading framework, the benefits from those 3 areas have been marginal at best, often criticized for resulting in the leakage of resources from economies like our own, or for, in so many ways, creating further levels of dependency and so forth. And so they have not been defined as success stories. In fact, the so-called development decades have all been viewed as major failures, with a few exceptions for a few countries. In the last 2 decades, the only key international flow of resources that have reduced, for example, poverty in some developing countries is in relation to remittances. So for example, in our part of the world, in Jamaica, rural poverty has declined in the last few years, principally as a result of remittances, which has been articulated by the World Bank. If you go to Mexico, again, in rural areas or dispossessed and marginalized areas of Mexico, it's the relationship between the investments by migrants abroad through remittances, but also through their work with hometown associations that have resulted in the reduction of poverty in Mexico and throughout Central and South America. Whenever there's a disaster in our part of the world, the first people and the first organizations to respond with a significant amount of resources are our diasporic communities. So while governments and international agencies are trying to figure out what to do, how to respond, and so forth, diasporic communities are the first to move in. That was definitely the case with the floods in Guyana several years ago, and in many respects, even the disaster in Haiti in terms of the earthquake. That was very much a massive disaster, but diasporic communities make a big impact, and particularly with the new technologies, social media, and so forth. So what I've tried to describe in this diagram is to show how the diasporic economy is linked to things like the remittances economy, sometimes in quite unexpected ways. And so, remittances is driving all kinds of new dimensions, like diasporic bonds or new financial instruments, mobile banking, trying to bank the unbanked, and so forth are all key issues. And what we are now seeing is a shift in the discourse away from almost a critique of those who receive remittances, because the argument has been made that by and large remittances are used purely for consumption, almost a hand-to-mouth scenario. But we are seeing that as the diasporic recipients improve in their circumstance, more and more of those resources are shifting towards investment. And not only that, the consumption that they're involved in is creating a new dynamic, which is resulting in flows associated with what we call the diasporic economy. So the impact on telecoms, the impact on new financial instruments and financial organizations, the impact on media and social networking, etc., are all key elements of the diasporic economy. So I try to capture for you what are some of the key elements. So yes, there's remittances, but there's trading goods, services and intellectual property, tourism and travel, ICTs and telecoms, mobile populations, and media and social networking. So for example, in some countries in Latin America, we know that 10% and more of their trading goods is directed at the diasporic markets. This table helps to illustrate how big the Caribbean is in terms of migration and the diasporic economy. This diagram or table compares the Caribbean with other countries or regions, Africa and the Pacific, because Africa, the Caribbean, and Pacific are part of what we call the ACP group of countries. And although the Caribbean only accounts for 4.4% of the population of the grouping, meaning the ACP grouping, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, in terms of share of migrants, it's 22%, and in terms of share of remittances, it's 25%. All right? So with only 4.4% of the migrants, you could see how substantial 4.4% of the population. You could see how large the migrant share is and how large the remittance share is. In that respect, one can argue, and I'll show it with some of the economic flows that we have seen, that Caribbean economies are now, in effect, largely driven by the diasporic economy. So when you look at the remittance data for Latin America and the Caribbean, which has been growing as of, I think, 2010 and 2011, the rate of growth for the Caribbean has been 8.3%, even though in 2008, 2009, there was a bit of a dip, 6% dip. It has rebounded. So you're seeing now growth rates of close to 8% in terms of the quantum of remittances. But this is the picture for the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. Not all countries are shown on the map, of course, because for the Caribbean it would require a bigger map if we were to include all the territories. But what I've shown here is the quantum of remittances for 2011. But the red blocks illustrate the share of GDP. So for example, in a country like Guyana, it's 17.3% of GDP. Now anybody who's done any economics knows that anything that's more than 5-6% of a GDP of a country is substantial. So 17.3% is enormous. Or as my kids would say, humongous. But Guyana is second to Honduras, which is 19.3%. And we estimate that these are underestimates. So you're looking at something closer to 20% of GDP. And so you have like Nicaragua, 10.3%, Dominican Republic, 7.3%, which is the lowest among the countries listed here. And these are the top 10 for Latin America and the Caribbean. So El Salvador has a very large diasporic community, and you can see it's reflected in their remittances, 15.7%. Another example, Jamaica, 13.8% of GDP. We know that's an underestimate. It's probably much closer to 20%. What I've tried to show as well is the brain drain rates, which is the extent to which your tertiary educated population have migrated. So, again, the Caribbean has the highest rates in the world. So, Jamaica, 18.5% of the tertiary educated have migrated. Guyana is 89%. Both Guyana and Suriname together have the highest brain drain rates in the world. And so you see other countries like Belize, 65.5%. Barbados is just below Belize at about high 50s, early 60%. Trinidad and Tobago is in the 70s, and so forth. Dominican Republic has the lowest brain drain rates in Latin America and the Caribbean, along with some other countries like Brazil, Argentina, and so forth. So you can see these are very substantial flows. In the research that we've done at the Sri Rampal Center, we've been able to identify that for tourism, which is the largest economic sector in the Caribbean, it employs the most people, it earns the most foreign exchange earnings, and has the largest share of GDP for most countries. For the 4 countries that we've focused on, these are some of the estimates. Now, there's a certain challenge with this research in that, by and large, we're using the category visiting friends and family as a proxy to estimate what is the number of people coming into these countries as tourists that self-identify as diasporic tourists. And that's the problem. It's about self-identification. Because if someone comes in with a US passport into Barbados for crop over, and they indicate that they are American, then they probably won't show up in the data. And so there's a particular challenge associated with this research in that in terms of the entry and departure cards that our countries use, we aren't able to properly capture the size of the diasporic economy and in terms of diasporic tourism. But I was in Guyana and Suriname recently, and they now estimate that the quantum of visitors that can be attributed to the diasporic community is now 70%. What that means is that in the case of Guyana and Suriname, that there's no tourism sector without the diasporic community. There is no airline service without the diasporic community, because it would make no economic sense to fly an airline into Guyana or Suriname if there wasn't a diasporic tourism flow. But that applies to other parts of the Caribbean as well. In Jamaica, we estimate that it's as high as 30-35%. And in Dominican Republic, particularly in the Santo Domingo airport, because they have 6 airports or more in Dominican Republic, that's as high as 30-45% of the visitors coming through there. So when you take into account these numbers, even for very mature tourism destinations like Dominican Republic and Jamaica that have large hotel plants, I mean, Dominican Republic, they have over 500 hotels, and so on. It means that you're talking about something still quite substantial. And this is some data on the frequency of arrivals and so forth into countries like the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Guyana when compared with Ecuador. And we can see, like in the case of Jamaica, that over 70, close to 70% of the visitors come at least once a year. So 70% of the interviewed diasporic community come to Jamaica once a year. That's quite good returns in terms of your diasporic community. We have also found that the diasporic economy is impacted by telecoms and vice versa. And so that we know throughout the region that a key source of earnings for many of our countries is actually the accounting rates associated with the telecoms. And in some instances, the firms operating in these sectors have been able to tap into the market. And possibly the best example of that is Telesur from Suriname that recently launched a dual SIM card, which is a card that has two numbers on it, a number that is a local number in Suriname and a local number in the Netherlands. And many of the diasporic tourists or business people who travel between the two locations can call back home or vice versa as a local call. Telesur, based on this data, has just about 1% of the market. It's actually gone up now, close to 1.5% of the market. And one may think that that's not substantial. Well, for a small company from a small country to have over 1% of the Dutch market is quite an achievement, because there are 25 mobile operators in the Netherlands, and none of the companies have more than 5 to 6% of the market. So a little company from a small country is a significant competitor in that market. And then there's Lapakan from Guyana, which is the largest employer in Guyana after the government of Guyana. It runs a freight and trade business. It has boats, planes, etc. It has offices all over North America, parts of Europe, and all over the Caribbean. So there's an office not too far away from here. Lapakan also operates the port in Guyana. It runs the largest department store. It has the second largest remittance company. It has a travel agency, and the list goes on. It's a very substantial company in the Guyanese context. And then my good colleague, Indiana Mintakoy, Dr. Indiana Mintakoy, recently sent me this article about the relationship between Golden Cross and another Jamaican company. And Golden Cross, which I've only recently found out about. In fact, I think I've eaten Golden Cross stuff when I was in the United States some time ago. But Golden Cross has 120 outlets all over the United States, and they estimate to get 2 million buyers per week, the bulk of which are from the diaspora, Jamaican and Caribbean, but at least 40% indicate that they are non-Jamaican or non-Caribbean. Golden Cross is hoping to expand to 500 outlets in the United States in the next coming years. But they've just done a big deal with another Jamaican firm to export Jamaican soft drinks and flavored drinks to the United States. And that company has 70% of the market share in Jamaica, and so it's expanding and exporting. And so these are examples: Golden Cross, Lapakan, Telesur, and we can give you several other examples of firms from the Caribbean that are tapping into the diasporic economy and the diasporic market and doing very successful at it. By and large, there is an absence of strategy at the level of government and many of the other agencies that are entrusted with the task of transforming and diversifying our economies. And so in this research, what we are trying to do is uncover and release this kind of information so we generate higher levels of interest among policymakers in terms of investing in the diasporic economy and in terms of diasporic entrepreneurship. Because when you look at the Caribbean economy, it's largely stuck. That's the term I've been using in the last few years. Our traditional sources of foreign exchange earnings are drying up, and they are unlikely to come back in the way that we had enjoyed them. And so it means that we need to diversify our economies. We do need to invest to an increasing degree in innovation to drive this diversification process. And I'm arguing, and my colleagues are similarly of this mind, that the diasporic economy is a key source of not just market, but a key source of entrepreneurship and innovation to drive the Caribbean economy. For far too long, we've been dependent on other people to come and save us, when in fact, a large share of the transformational possibilities, I think, come from our own people if we include those from the diasporic communities. I will end on this note for now and show you a 10-minute clip from our documentary entitled Forward Home, The Power of the Caribbean Diaspora. So please bear with me as I do the changeover. And after the documentary, we'll do a question and answer session. And I felt it was better to talk first, do the documentary, because I would be a poor act to follow the documentary.
Jamaica, and the Dominican Republic. All unique and somewhat exotic Caribbean countries visited by thousands of tourists every year. Many coming from destinations far and wide. A significant amount, however, come from the diaspora, living in global cities.
I feel that part of what I can contribute to Guyana is that I could spend some of my tourist dollars in Guyana. And I think that it's like sort of saying, oh, I'm doing my good deed, but I'm enjoying doing my good deed.
Who are these people, these diasporic tourists? And how do they contribute to the social and economic order of their home countries in the Caribbean?
In various ways. I mean, it may be by remittance. Would I go to Jamaica National and send some money, you know, or send home to pay insurance or something of the sort, you know, or some sort of savings, because again, I do compulsory savings as well with a lot of banks and stuff home, so.
The impact of diasporic travel between global cities and their home countries may not fully be recognized because of a number of reasons.
People like to take Jamaican when they come in, rather than saying, you know, I'm a visitor, because they figure Jamaica is their home.
Our diaspora, our people in other countries, they're not accepting them as tourists. They are seeing them as friends and family, and they are saying, well, they're not really contributing to their country. But if you look at at some of the results of the research, they are contributing.
Let's say on the average, one visitor spends, let's say, 1,000, 1,500 euros per trip. And we have like 80,000 visitors coming into Suriname. You can easily multiply.
15% of our occupancy per year is based on the diaspora.
While the traditional visitor will come and spend money in the restaurants and retail shops, what the diasporan tourists we have seen, what they do is spend in the supermarkets, give to family and friends, and donations to alumni and community organizations. It's huge.
On a per capita basis, Caribbean countries are the highest recipients of remittances.
It's estimated that approximately $1 billion is remitted out of the UK and Europe into Jamaica every year.
In our case, remittance has become the second segment of income that is generated in the country.
I don't think most people understand how the Caribbean economy has expanded over time. And what we mean by that is that the Caribbean economy is not just the littoral spaces, meaning the island territories and the mainland territories like Guyana, Belize, and Suriname, all packaged together. Caribbean economy has expanded beyond that to include global cities like New York, like Miami, Toronto, Amsterdam, London, Paris, and so on, because a large share of our community lives there. And the linkages with our domestic or national economies is very, very strong.
Diasporic peoples may increasingly use the internet and new media in order to stay in touch with what's happening at home. However, nothing can replace the good old-fashioned phone call.
You're seeing a very large push by Cable and Wireless Caribbean, as well as Digicel, to infiltrate the diaspora market to sell their phone cards.
Suriname-owned Telesur is the largest mobile provider in Suriname and has been able to penetrate the Dutch market.
As a telecommunication company, we came with the SIM card with two numbers on it. One Dutch number and a Surinamese number. And the way it works is that Surinamese people living in the Netherlands can make calls within the Netherlands with a SIM card and to Suriname. But since there are two numbers on the card, the direction determines which number is being shown.
The diaspora is a key component of the home country's economy via travel and tourism, remittances, transfer of knowledge, and their contribution at the community level. In addition, there's a significant amount of trade between diasporic communities in global cities and their home countries.
After the visit to Suriname, people are sending a lot of goods they bought there, because the 25 kilos they get from the airlines is never enough.
The English-speaking Caribbean is geared towards the barrel. When that family is going to clear that barrel, not one person go. There's a whole group of them go, right? If you go into Jamaica, for example, there are 4 or 5 people that go to clear one barrel. It's like a celebration.
That's trade at the personal level. What about the commercial movement of goods?
The products that they focus on are fresh produce primarily. The yam, ever since Usain Bolt says he is the fastest man in the world because of yam. Yam is Jamaican yam, you can't get enough of it. The sweet potatoes, the ginger, all of these products are distinguishable from products you might get out of Africa and Asia. In addition to that, they're processed foods. The kalaloo, the ackee, and the sauces. The jerk sauces in particular. All of these products are in high demand in the UK, not only among the diaspora, but your average British consumer.
Nee, maar hebben ze gelijk een teleurstelling als...
Ja, daarom toch. Dus ik hoop dat dit wel goed...
Whilst the Caribbean economy has expanded to global cities, in some cases a feeling of nostalgia or a longing for cultural heritage draws members of the diaspora back to the Caribbean. Herein lies an opportunity for heritage and festival tourism. Caribbean countries are at differing levels of readiness to capitalise on this new diaspora economy.
There's a tendency to think that diasporic tourists will always come, that we don't have to market to them, that we don't have to entice them, that we don't have to plan for them. That is not true. because they operate in market spaces that are very competitive. But our advantage is that they have identity links to the region. Unless we begin to strategize about this target market and target them in a more sophisticated kind of way, we may begin to lose this market share. This target market provides a crossover into other target markets through people's linkages, their colleagues, their friends, etc. They are able to bring other people into the Caribbean space so that they enjoy it, in fact, in a more authentic way, in a more meaningful way. And so diasporic tourists are like our Trojan horses. They provide us with an in into various market spaces, which probably wouldn't be accessible to us otherwise.
I went away looking for another home. I tried to run away from my destiny. In another world, a world that was strange to me. I tried to change myself.
Okay, thank you very much.